This is the Pulverize druid. It's one of the easiest and most explosive build a druid can have while leveling. I want to make the most consistent guide to getting you to the end game and farming that spicy unique that elevates your druid build to the next level. So I spent 20 hours getting this druid to level 50 so we could find out what the best build is to level your druid game up. I tried a number of things like full lightning tornado.
I was just thinking that the only problem I had with this build really was this lightning, this storm was the problem I had. This is actually fantastic. You would be surprised how often I get that reaction.
I tried Shred, both teleport and poison. I even tried the infamous Landslide build that has many legendary powers going into it.
This is awesome. Because I could not for the life of me figure out what I needed to do on this character. I had some like weird like lightning build going on, and then I just got a couple like landslide powers, so now I'm trying out some the landslide stuff.
And I tried Pulverize. And this video is where you are going to find out which one I believe will get you to 50 the easiest. But first, I want to discuss the process I went through when deciding which build gets my recommendation. So, we started early game with Shred. It was something that interested me when I did my initial Season 1 prep. I settled on Poison first. So, with starting off with Poison, I started with Wind Shear, thinking it would be a decent way to keep my movement speed up and offer a source of vulnerability. Then directly into Shred, getting Poison ASAP. While this felt fine early on, it seemed to lack more speed than I wanted. So immediately I was like, okay, how do we get more speed? I think having multiple dashes would be very helpful, so we'll use the teleport Shred. I saw the spirit issues early with a legendary power on my ring that allowed you to have a chance to get all of your resource back, as well as through shapeshift talent that gives 6 spirit back when you shapeshift back into human form. And at first, my biggest gripe was that this build was a bit too spammy and the payoff wasn't there. So moving on to the teleport version of Shred, which gives you critical strike damage, it was very fast paced, but it lacked a couple things: a large amount of AoE clear and high single target damage. If I was going to be sacrificing my finger basically for this build, I wanted more out of it. And so because of that, I had one more other issue with it. The second might be a reoccurring theme in this video because the single target damage is fantastic. I had my speed with teleport, and I had a few core skills with legendary powers that I thought would make up some of the damage I felt I was missing. Even when I felt like my single target was good enough to pass, it definitely wasn't. Enough to justify, having a lack of large AoE for clearing. So that was one of the biggest problems. You see, in these types of games, there are 2 goals in my eyes: moving fast and doing enough damage to defeat enemies in both an area and on a boss. If the build doesn't have these, I'm sorry. I can't have my recommendation on it because it's not going to be good for you long term. You're going to feel very awkward while playing these type of builds. But that brings us to the next build. This one is the all lightning storm tornado druid. We selected every single skill that was lightning in each of the trees, and we just went ham with all of the lightning passives. It was a great time. It was a heck of an upgrade from the previous Shred build. So this build was formed out of my frustration from the shred build at start. I wanted something that can do decent single target damage, but it fully focused on clearing large groups, as it was going to give you the most XP while leveling, and that's kind of the key with this guy. This build gets that done. The storm cooldowns mixed with the spirit boons that you can select had a wonderful synergy. The tornadoes can hit the same enemy multiple times, make them vulnerable, and easily decimate an entire room of enemies, especially in enclosed places. And if you're lucky enough to get this legendary power, it makes your tornadoes seek targets, and it just changes the way this entire build plays. The damage uptime is insane. This was a day and night change coming from the shred build, as it was able to speed through many dungeons on that renowned grind, and as we know, that is something that is going to be key in raiding any of the builds that we might come across online. This build also doesn't really lack any sources of vulnerability, as storm spells are the best way to apply it on a druid. I was also able to solve the spirit problem with the same wind shear ring that we had in the previous shred version of the build. With so many good things to say, why didn't it make the cut? Thank you so much for asking. This build lacks consistency, and that really is the key. The tornadoes go all over the place. They're random and off and going in many directions as they can possibly find. And the solve for that problem is also a random drop legendary power. And I cannot recommend RNG when leveling. The differences in variations can vary greatly. I found so many mage powers for my necromancer initially, and then when I'm doing my replay of the campaign as a view experience, I can't get one to save my life now, and it's just I need consistency when I'm going to give my stamp of approval on a build. And if this build had a way to group up enemies, then it would have the #1 slot here, even with the randomness of those tornadoes. This build was definitely fun, and the visuals are fantastic. If I get that tornado seeking power, I'll probably do this build 350, and I would recommend it. So if you get it, that's what I would recommend. And that takes us to our final test build, the Landslide build. And it's many legendary powers that go along with it. Landslide not only has a unique talent that completely reshapes its foundation, but it also has many powerful and fun legendary powers that go together with it. This build is very powerful, and at its base has some additional guaranteed legendary powers that elevate it to the next level, with powers like Creeper casting Landslide, which is guaranteed because it's part of our seasonal journey, and most of your damage will come from Poison Creeper, as we found out through many of these testings. And then Trample also casting Landslide. That one is an RNG drop, but that one is fantastic. It does so much damage. It can even be a single target powerhouse. If you get that power, throwing it on will just elevate any build you have Trample on. These things elevate the very ground you stand on. And you might think, well, with the amount of land puns I'm able to make in this section, how did it not make the #1 slot? Well, this build has good AoE. The Poison Creeper does a massive chunk of damage, and there are spirit boons that help shorten the cooldown through resets. Landslide, at its core, has some really good damage and gives guaranteed critical hits through the talent, which is very hard to do while leveling. But it lacks a good source of vulnerability. You also have to be standing in a group to get that big AoE off, and it risks taking too much damage, and absolutely no way to group enemies. Once again, this is a problem with the Druid class as a whole. Some of these things that Druid class just lacks, I will admit, but other builds handle these things fairly well and have strengths in other areas. And finally, that takes us to the Pulverize build, the main topic of this video. This build is fantastic, and it has so many strengths that make playing the game so much more fun. This Pulverize build was a saving grace for the entire druid leveling experience. Let me tell you, the other ones were okay at best. Some of them felt cool to play but weren't good, and Pulverize pulled me back in, and I'm so glad I swapped back to it. All the way up to the point of finally having the build put together, the druid felt sluggish, lacked damage, and there was just something special to be able to group enemies that the druid just completely lacked. This Pulverize playstyle plays very smooth and easy. It's basically, do you have enough spirit to cast Pulverize? Well then cast Pulverize. And because of that, and every other build lacking that main single target damage, that this build just shines. You're hitting Pulverize and you're clearing the screen, and you're doing about as much single target damage as every other build kind of does. Except for the Tornado build. The Tornado build excels in single target heavily, but you have to have that RNG power and you have to get lucky finding that. Which brings me to my next topic. The only build that had any remotely decent single target damage was the Lightning Tornado build. It had the best outcome, but it was pure RNG unless you get that aspect that makes Tornado Seek, which is a random drop. I have the entire build up to 50 path out so that you have the exact route you need to take. It'll be in the comments below, along with all of the other aspects. The notable thing is that Shockwave aspect is on a weapon in my build guide. However, I recommend that the majority of the early levels you put it on your amulet, as you will be swapping your weapon very often. Real quick, just want to touch on some of these important powers. So we have the Shockwave aspect. This makes it so that when you hit Pulverize, it's going to send a Shockwave out that's going to deal a portion of the damage of your Pulver. And what this is going to do is make it so that you are clearing the screen instead of hitting right down on top of you with Pulverize. It's going to make it a fantastic addition to your build. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this is mostly going to be in your necklace for those early levels. But from when you get a really good weapon or a decent weapon, maybe a sacred weapon, you can always throw it in your weapon as it will give you that more damage. Now, a couple key points here are going to be taking this wind shear power. I would recommend going to grab this very early on, as it'll just randomly fill up your spirit bar and you can just go ahead and hit more shockwaves, and that's really the whole point of this entire build. One of the next very important powers to get, at least before you get to like around the 40s, is to go pick up this Pulverize, now becoming an Earth skill power. Earth Sign 4 is very good. The tectonic spikes are kind of irrelevant, but making Pulverize an Earth skill gives so many other benefits that we can use it for in the rest of the talent tree. And another one here is ballistic aspect. So you want to get Earth Sign 4 first, then you're going to go over and grab the ballistic aspect one from this dungeon, as your Earth skills are going to get those +2 ranks. And that is a fantastic way to get that addition of the damage. I would always recommend just kind of filling out your whole tree here as some of the first things that you do with playtime in Diablo 4. I'll give it any new season. Going into the spirit boons, you can see we are aligned with the eagle. Really any order you would prefer to get them in, but starting off with pack leader, just because of how powerful the poison creeper is at early levels, is really what you want to be doing. And as I mentioned, we are going to have a full level it out process for you, which is going to take which order in this build, with a quick note as well of just to make sure you put your shockwave power in your necklace early on, because you'll be swapping out your weapon. Which brings us to our conclusion. Poison Creeper is a powerful leveling tool for druids. We came to this conclusion as many builds on the internet recommend this move while leveling. However, it pretty much is always dropped in the end game. Making enemies consistently vulnerable is very difficult if you are not using lightning skills. It's very easy to have a mediocre druid build, and Pulverized Druid is the easiest to play and is consistent. But if you get the legendary power that makes Tornado Seek, I would recommend Tornado, as the visuals were amazing. And there's a ton of ambient damage as the tornadoes go around. and it had great AoE and great single target damage. So if you can get that seeking power to drop for you, I would highly recommend checking those style of builds out. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. I hope you liked the video. If you did, drop a like, comment about your favorite druid build, and subscribe for more content.